Aaron, I thought the discussion that you had with Alex Kashuta was fascinating because that was a discussion about the IDW, to be clear, that I thought needed to be had, and perhaps we could, put a just elaborate, put a bit more of a finer point on it, and I guess I'll start by asking you, just for the three people in the audience who don't know, could you describe what the IDW is or was, if you think it's still really a cohesive entity, why you think it was successful and why it has failed? I assume you think, obviously, it has now totally crumbled.
Yeah. Well, it started out as kind of this loose coalition. It was never really a formal thing, of course. It was branded, I believe, by Barry Weiss in her New York Times article, but it was a lot of people who had kind of been brought into the Joe Rogan podcast or were in the orbit of it. And it's guys like Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro and a lot of guys who were at the time saying things that were, little beyond the pale, outside of the normal constraints, not allowed to be said kind of in the halls of academia. And the idea was that, because this coalition spanned from what was considered, I guess, very conservative by these people like Ben Shapiro and left leaning people like Sam Harris, that there would be some kind of sensible centrist position that would coalesce around these intellectuals who are able to kind of raise the level of debate and have discussions in a way that we hadn't seen in a long time. They would be able to evade cancel culture and they'd be able to share these ideas. And it was basically kind of the last gasp of liberalism. It's the last gasp of the idea that if we just got intelligent enough and if there's just enough free speech, then we had enough discussion about important topics, then eventually we would be able to kind of navigate these very difficult and fraught waters that only become more tumultuous in our culture. And we'd be able to kind of reestablish this neutral position where kind of everyone would be able to live and let live, and we'd be able to move forward together kind of in that classically liberal sense.
Mm.
And I think it just fell apart because, well, they couldn't do that, right? Like Jordan Peterson was probably the most interesting guy out of that bunch. He was the guy saying something that was more deeply rooted in ancient wisdom than anyone else, which is why I think he had an audience that kind of moved beyond that. But it became very clear as time went on that there simply wasn't a lot of common ground for many of these people to actually operate under, other than some kind of vague commitment to free speech. They fundamentally didn't share values. And when you look at the guys like Sam Harris, who have now come to the point where they said, well, yeah, I'm a classical liberal, but I don't care about free speech, and I don't care if they censor the president of the United States. I don't care if a guy has bodies of children in his basement. You shouldn't run the story if it'll allow Donald Trump to get elected. I mean, at that point, you just kind of understand that these free speech was never really the goal at the end of the day. I don't think it was intended as containment. I don't think that they got together and there was a cabal of like, we will now create some kind of intellectual containment apparatus to keep these questions from evolving beyond the point where we're comfortable with them. But I think that's exactly what it became. And at least it worked for a little while, but at the end of the day, it kind of escaped the orbit and everything fell apart.
So let me try and steel man the other side here,
Sure.
and actually try and use the example you give of Peterson being perhaps the most interesting figure of the bunch. Well, Peterson and Harris, I think, did 3 talks. I think like Dublin, London, somewhere else, maybe 2 in London, at the Millennium, the O2 Arena, big stadium, selling out tens of thousands of seats. Is that not hopeful? It doesn't sound like, if you think about it in those terms, that sounds, this guy's still got millions of followers on Twitter, this big podcast signed by the Daily Wire. It sounds like there is this appetite for, okay, let's just stick with Peterson. A discussion about the importance of religion and ancient values.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. It is good news that there is, on some level, a real market for this, right? And we see this with the explosion of long form content. We see this with the ability of people to, now that they have this found time with podcasts and that kind of thing, they can mow the lawn and work out and drive
Mm-hmm.
and listen to something in a way that, when you had destination TV, well, you got to block off 30 minutes and you got to be sitting right in front of the thing and you can't do anything else. So I think some of it is format change. I think some of it is overload, and some of it was the fracturing of the media sphere, when you have the ability to disseminate this kind of stuff to a very particular audience, you can draw in a lot more people, as to where before, you had to craft all of this content to the kind of audience that had a 10-minute attention span. And so I think there are a lot of factors involved in the rise of guys like Peterson. And at the end of the day, it's a good thing that he has an audience. I think overall, while I have disagreements with Peterson, I think he's a force for good. And I think that it's a good thing that he gained the notoriety he did. But the question of the IDW was not, could one person be interesting or could they gain an audience? The question was, could we solve these issues? Could we heal this cultural divide, right? We didn't just need a few guys to become popular and have book deals. We were looking for people who could heal this thing and once again return us to this, again, that kind of neutral classical liberal center where a bunch of people with different values and different end goals of life could communicate and cooperate. And I think in that aspect, it did fail.